What I'm going to show you now, and I'm really talking here about buying off photographs. I'm going to show you 3 pictures. There's the first one. This was the winning red at the show now. The same photograph will appear again. Different settings on my camera. The highlights have blown out some of the color. And here is one where I have somewhat enhanced the colors. Now, the first one is correctly exposed, showing the color accurately. The second has different camera settings and shows the colors inaccurately because it blows them out. And if we go back to that one where I've enhanced the colors and I've purposely left what happened to the yellow centers when I enhanced the foliage, you see the centers have turned a bit green. This is sort of overdone quite a bit, and anybody that knows what they're doing is not going to leave that like that. But where you see colors that are exaggerated, it doesn't mean to say that somebody's tampering with the color range, but it could mean. So that is just an indicator that you can look for. Best time to buy a Clivia is when the flower is in front of you. It's not to say that you should not buy it any other time. The vast majority of sellers are selling in good faith, but both buyer and seller should recognize that there's a risk that the person buying is not going to get exactly what they hoped for. Now, everybody in the Clivia world actually knows this, because you know that if you have a plant, if you get an offset, it's going to be pretty much what you've actually seen of the original flower, not necessarily the photograph. If you buy seed, it could be anything. But you know that certain sources are reasonably accurate in what they do, and that's why you buy from them. If everybody just sold orange seed as something else, they'd soon lose their reputation and you wouldn't buy from them anymore. So sellers do try to get it right, but you can't get it right all the time. And anybody buying has to accept that risk, as far as I'm concerned anyhow. If you want to buy off a photograph, here is what's happening with technology. That is a Clivia totally generated by artificial intelligence. I didn't do it. I found it. It was the only one I could find on the internet. It's not a particularly great Clivia, but there it is. And over time, artificial intelligence is going to get better. So be warned. That rose looks far better than the Clivia, but it's done by artificial intelligence. That one, somebody just wanting to make a blue rose, also artificial intelligence. There you have a bee on a flower, artificial intelligence. Looks a bit more realistic. And here you have somebody that's used both artificial intelligence and their knowledge of Photoshop. And of course, that's where you're going to get the best results at this stage. They took the black and white photograph there, they took a coal mine, and they asked artificial intelligence to create a person within the photograph of the coal mine using that particular black and white image. And that was what the result has come out as. And it has been worked after artificial intelligence in Photoshop. And it's not a bad result. I often get asked, what camera should I use? Whether you use a state-of-the-art mirrorless or a good cell phone camera depends on what you want to use the photographs for. If you're looking for pictures to view on your cell phone or computer only, the cell phone camera will suffice. Where detail, versatility of setup are required, a traditional camera is preferred. I think you'll all know that when you take photographs on your cell phone, that seldom are the colors exactly the same. That can be said for cameras as well, of course, but they are far closer because if you've got a good camera, because it's better able to deal with everything. It's got a lot more computer space in the camera than the cell phone has. Why do I say this? A cell phone camera has a much smaller sensor than a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. This gives an advantage to the cell phone of apparent, and I need to use that word, apparent depth of field, or depth of focus, should I say, but the details are not as good when viewed at any size. Cell phone camera does not have the versatility, or most cell phone cameras don't have the versatility of setup variations. And a state-of-the-art camera is always going to be able to have more control on how you set it up for the conditions that you have to photograph under. Color rendition is also not as accurate in all light conditions on a cell phone. That was a second runner-up in the bronze green-throat category in 2013. Now, if you look at that, you'll see that the greens are quite prominent. I can tell you that my camera shot, which I don't have anymore, unfortunately, otherwise I would have showed it alongside this, the green wasn't quite as prominent as that. And I made the green a little bit more prominent because it better fitted what the actual flower looked like. So you can see that people do or are able to change things. This was a yellow, a very nice yellow in 2011, I think, or maybe 2012. And it's on a black background that I tend to prefer these days to a white background. Unfortunately, just at that time, people had been losing seed off Clivia when at shows, and so that's why there's a bag around those seed. When I actually got this particular pic, it came out a bit paler than it should. That color, you can see on this color chart, is color 64, and I made it as close as I could to color 64. So that is another bit of manipulation, but out of the camera. But because I recorded the exact color at the time, it allows me to do that to make it closer to what the actual flower head looked like. Now, how should you go about taking Clivia photographs? Firstly, what do you want to do with the picture? It'll help you decide how you should take the photograph and where you should take the photograph. Think about the Clivia that you want to photograph as if it were your daughter, or given the average age of people around here, I think that maybe it should be granddaughter. off to her matric dance. Now, really, you're going to take a bit of care over that picture, and you should take care over your Clivier photographs as well. Look at where you're taking the picture and see that there's nothing that's going to detract or clash with the picture, particularly in the background. Look at the Clivier from all sides to find the best angle, the most attractive angle. But also look at it from above, because sometimes it's better to photograph a Clivier from above, or partially from above. If you want to know what your best accessory for photographing Clivier would be, it's a tripod or some device that is going to hold whatever you are photographing steady. If you're holding it, there's some amount of camera shake. Sometimes this is catered for by the speed of the shutter. Other times it blurs the shot a little bit. When you use a flash, that flash duration is very short. So it's less important there, because if the flash is really the lighting for the actual Clivier, it's so short that it doesn't pick up very much shake. Look at the light that you're trying to photograph when you're trying to photograph, and in natural light, but preferably photograph in natural light, but not direct sunlight. Do not photograph in a shade house, because the color of your shade cloth is going to distort the light and distort the colors in your photograph. Photograph indoors if the wind is blowing. Use window light if you don't have speed lights or a flash to light the Clivier that you want to photograph. And I must tell you that I believe that natural light is always far better. Here you have a salmon peach, color 46, and this was photographed with side light. If you have a look at it, on your left side it's quite light, on your right side it's quite dark, and that adds to the depth of the actual Clivier head. If you don't have an even light throughout, it's, I think, more attractive, but it's a matter of personal taste. There's another one. This is a multi-petal, and again side light, so that the one side is brighter than the other, and that adds a little bit more depth to the photograph. Tips: try to keep level with the flower unless you want to photograph it from above. If you're photographing up or too much down, you can distort your photograph. Make sure if you have settings on your camera that they're correct. I recommend buying about 2 meters of black velvet that you can hang for a backdrop somewhere. You can peg it or pin it to a door. This reduces any shadows that might fall on the background from your lighting, and it sets off the Clivier colors very nicely. The smaller the aperture used by your camera, the greater the depth of focus, but it allows less light through the lens. The faster the shutter speed, the less blur and camera shake, but the less light will reach the sensor. There's also what we call ISO to consider, and this controls the sensitivity of the sensor to the light that reaches it. Now, I always imagine this to be like the scales of justice. On the one side you have shutter speed, on the other side you have aperture, and in the middle you have ISO. And you need to keep a balance. And if you move your scale a little bit along so the ISO is no longer in the middle, then either the shutter speed or the aperture is going to be out of balance, So you have to change one of them to keep the balance. I'm not going to go any further into technical details because most of you have a camera that has an automatic feature, and in most cases you're probably going to use this. You're not going to shoot in a manual way. So just shoot on automatic unless you find that the conditions don't allow you to get a good photograph. If you have a flash, you can use it, but try to modify any really bright light. And what is a modifier? Modifier is a diffuser. Here is one, it's translucent. You also have a modifier like this or a diffuser like this that fits onto a flash, and you don't get that very bright light that comes from your flash. This is not really so easy for cell phones, but if you ever find it necessary to modify the flash on your cell phone, all you do is you get a piece of tissue, one layer of white tissue over the flash. That will act as a modifier, and as long as it's a white tissue, you won't have any problems with the light. How to light your Clivia? The best light comes from a cloud-covered sky. This is the best diffuser, and I always find the nicest photographs get taken like this. Side light from a window can be attractive, sometimes a reflector. Now, this diffuser can also become a reflector. Usually I use a bigger one, but this is just a small one that I use now for this demonstration. You can have silver light that you reflect into your Clivia. It's particularly good if you've got an interspecific or a pendulous one, then you can try and reflect light up into the throat, inner throat. You can use a white reflector, you can use a gold reflector. If you're photographing a Clivia in the ground and it's in bright sunlight for whatever reason, you can hold that black section up either way really and block off the very bright light from your Clivia. When you're photographing, the other thing to do is to decide at what level you want to photograph the Clivia. If it's a very tall Clivia, you might want to put the pot on the ground. If it's a small Clivia, you might want to raise it up so that you can keep your camera level with it. These two Clivias, quite similar, multi-petals, were photographed with front light, well exposed, and both quite attractive Clivia. When I photograph show winners, I always take the photograph with the identifying card with all the entry details on. This gets clipped onto the pot. It's called a plamp. Card goes in there, so I photograph it with the card, and then I photograph it without this. And the reason for that is, over the years I found that when recording, whether it was myself or whether it was one of my helpers, somewhere along the line, somebody would make a mistake, and you'd suddenly get the wrong Clivia photograph or Clivia out of sequence, and you wouldn't quite get the details right afterwards. So if I do it that way, I always know that the details are going to be correct, because I can identify, as you'll see with photographs in a moment, exactly which Clivia I photographed. I also record the color using this color chart to enable me to get it as close as possible on my balanced screen to what the actual Clivia looked like. As we've said before, unfortunately, every make and model of computer screen or cell phone reproduces colors slightly differently. So there is no guarantee that it will look the same on any other device. There's a shot of, before I knew it was the Best on Show, of the Best on Show Clivia. I rephotographed it after that, taking a hell of a lot more care than I did here. But and there is when I photographed it, and these are quite untouched out of the camera. When I'm photographing Clivia, I tend to use a 50mm lens. If I want to go close up, I will use a macro lens. If I want to photograph an individual floret or something like that. I also sometimes use a wide-angle lens if I'm photographing a display of Clivia. But generally speaking, for the show conditions, don't want to be too far away or have to go too close, so a 50mm lens does the job. 85mm suddenly puts you quite a bit away. Yes, Andre?
Your preference for shutter speed, if you have options available to you, what is your preferred shutter speed?
What basically happens here is I these days photograph indoors because either the wind or the conditions don't allow me to go outdoors where I would prefer to go. But indoors I'm using a flash or speed lights, 2 speed lights, and what basically happens is this. The default with the flash and speed lights is a 60th of a second. It doesn't really make any difference what speed I photograph at because the camera is on a tripod. And then I set up the light as I want it to be, and I then find what aperture I should use. Generally speaking, when you do that, you have to look at the ambient light, which is the light that's there anyhow, and the light that is coming off your flash and speed lights, and you then change the aperture to suit whatever that is to give you the correct exposure. This takes a few test shots, but it works very well. If I was photographing without my speed lights or a flash, it would be a very slow shutter speed indoors and a wide aperture, a wide-ish aperture, simply because otherwise there's not enough light to get a decent exposure. However, generally speaking, whether it's your cell phone or whatever camera you're using that has a flash on it, it's going to tell you to use the flash, and the default shutter speed will be a 60th, and then you must just play with the aperture to see what works best, or use automatic. I would probably try to photograph at f8 and see whether it works, and if it didn't work, it was fairly close, I might play with the ISO to get it right. The base ISO for the camera is always going to give you your best detail. Whatever the base ISO is, whether it's 100 or 200, that's going to be what will give you your best detail. But if you've got to go up with a modern camera, you can go up quite high.